All right, all right. Dr. Nazir sir, I have talked to the VC sir. He is busy somewhere else. May I request you to chair the session and we should start it right now, sir. Dr. Nazir sir, sir, your mic is mute. कंट्रोल करो मुझे दो कंट्रोल मैं भी ले सकता हूँ कंट्रोल मैं भी ले सकता हूँ हाँ मेरे साथ भी शेयर करें हेलो डॉक्टर नजीर साहब हेलो
It disappeared.
सर वीसी साहब की बिजी हैं तो डॉक्टर नज़ीर साहब सर हम आपके साथ शुरू कर लें प्रोग्राम सर आपका माइक शायद म्यूट है
Rahat sent him a message in the chat.
I'm just trying to unmute him. साहिब साहब डॉक्टर नज़ीर साहब को माइक अनम्यूट कराइए
जी करेंगे इसलिए मैं कह रहा था कि कंट्रोल इधर भी आना चाहिए अस्सलाम वालेकुम सर अनम्यूट करें नहीं है हेलो डॉक्टर नजीर साहब वो कह रहे हैं कि मेरा माइक अनम्यूट करें Yep. अनम्यूट किया हुआ अच्छा हेलो डॉक्टर नजीर साहब कैन यू हियर अस हेलो हाँ 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 डॉक्टर नजीर साहब कैन यू हियर मी हेलो
ऐसे फोन कर लिया ना
ये लेट जा रही है आवाज हमारी फोन बंद है उनका, फोन बंद है उनका इसी प्रोग्राम की वजह से. He is trying to get through, but there is some problem.
जी अस्सलाम वालेकुम. I'm audible, I'm visible.
सिर्फ 4 ही तो होगा.
मैं स्टार्ट करूं? कैन आई स्टार्ट?
जी अवान साहब मेरी आवाज आ रही है अब?
वाला भी कॉल करते हैं.
अवान साहब
आप ना मेरे से कनेक्ट कर
वो भाई वो अच्छा नहीं.
साहिब साहब शुरू
Oh
करें?
yes.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum and a very good day. Today we are together to observe Kashmir Solidarity Day under the banner of National Institute of Historical and Cultural Research, Center of Excellence, Quaid-i-Azam University, Islamabad. With me we have Dr. Nazir Hussain, Dean Faculty of Social Sciences, Quaid-i-Azam University, Miss Victoria Schofield, author of many books on South Asia and particularly on Kashmir. We also have Raja Muhammad Sajjad Khan. He is chief editor of Monthly Kashmir Today and has authored several books with reference to Kashmir. I'm also grateful to have Dr. Sajid Mahmood Awan, Director NHCR, with us today. Honorable Vice Chancellor at Quaid-i-Azam University, Dr. Muhammad Ali, also had to join us, but because of some other things of importance, he had to be somewhere else, so he is not here. And we request Dr. Nazir Hussain to chair today's session. Sir, Dr. Nazir Sahab, I request you kindly to open with welcome address and opening remarks as well. Dr. Nazir Sahab.
आवाज आ रही है? हेलो अस्सलाम वालेकुम. हेलो अस्सलाम वालेकुम. Are you listening me?
जी सर आ रही है.
सर आ रही है
Okay.
आवाज.
वालेकुम अस्सलाम सर.
Okay. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. It's a great honor and privilege to chair a seminar
Oh yes sir.
on,
वालेकुम अस्सलाम. You are
on Kashmir, especially on the 5th of February, which has been celebrated or made as a Solidarity Day of Pakistanis and people living all around the world for the solidarity with the Kashmiri people. It's a privilege and honor to have with us Miss Victoria Schofield. She is a very well-known author and expert on South Asia and especially on Kashmir. We have just spoken to her and she has updated her very well known book on conflict in Kashmir, and she has added a very important chapter. And as I was discussing with her just now, that we were looking forward for a neutral academic perspective on the post 5th of August 2019 developments, and she is very kind when he kind enough to include that particular chapter. We are looking forward to read that, and people all around the world would be interested to read that. One thing which I would like to address is that Kashmiris have been suffering because of the three main stakeholders. One, the Kashmiris themselves. Their leadership have betrayed them time and again, starting from Sheikh Mohammed Abdullah to the current leadership in occupied Kashmir. They have been switching their side from one to another, and that has been a dilemma. The Kashmiris want freedom. The Kashmiris want independence. That's simple and square. Secondly, the Kashmiris are hostage to the Indians and Pakistanis' policies on Kashmir. It's not a bilateral issue. It's an issue of human beings It's an issue of the people in the occupied territory. And as Ms. Schofield has probably written in her book, that the Kashmiris are in doubled lockdown. One, the epidemic, COVID-19, and the other, the curfew imposed by the Indian occupied forces. The third stakeholder, the international community. I'm totally amazed that why they are silent. It's not a bilateral issue. It's an issue of human beings. It's an issue of people. It's an issue of freedom of expression. And therefore, I think today's seminar would be an important element, important contribution in highlighting the problems in the occupied Kashmir, and our voice as the hosts have relaying this live on Facebook and YouTube. Probably some conscientious people in the international community would listen to it and would raise their voice. As Indian occupied forces are doing the same in Kashmir, the same is today being approached in New Delhi against the Sikhs who are on streets demanding their rights or different rights. And we are glad that international community, the voices, the singers, and the human rights people in United States of America have risen their voice. So after having this, I'm looking forward to listen to Ms. Victoria Sheffield and to Raja Sajid Khan Saab for insight out of the Kashmir issue. And as Ms. Victoria has visited the occupied Kashmir, she'll be more importantly discussing the situation in Kashmir. Looking forward, sir and madam, and thank you for joining all the way from England and from Muzaffarabad. Over to you, Rahat.
So, Kashmir solidarity was observed for the first time in 1932 against the autocratic rule of Maharaja Hari Singh by the then Kashmir Committee, and from others onwards. Then onwards, it's being observed with pauses and in between. In Pakistan, it's being observed regularly since 1990 against the atrocities of Indian occupational forces. Now I request Raja Sajad Khan to discuss about certain important documents about Kashmir. I have seen his book, Historical Documents on Jammu and Kashmir, and this book carries actually from UN resolutions, international agreements, and other documents with reference to Kashmir. So I request Raja Saab to discuss about these documents as well, and as he feels with reference to this day, the Kashmir Solidarity Day. Over to you, Raja Saab.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Respected Chair, thanks National Institute of Historical and Cultural Research, Quaid-i-Azam University, Islamabad, for organizing this webinar and providing me an opportunity to share my views with you and audience. The topic of my discussion, as Dr. Rath has already mentioned, is documents on Jammu and Kashmir. There are many historical and legal documents on Jammu and Kashmir, but I shall discuss some of them which are most important. The claim that Jammu and Kashmir is a disputed territory is based on some documents. It is not just a political one. The first document was Treaty of Amritsar, which had created the modern state of Jammu and Kashmir that was existing on 15th August 1947. This was an agreement between Gulab Singh and British government. The second important document is Indian Independence Act of 1947, which is not only Kashmir specific, but it is important with reference to princely states. Article 7b indicates that sovereignty of Crown was lapsed on 15th August 1947, and all agreements, treaties, and all obligations were also lapsed. The princely states were free to choose whether to associate with one or the other of the Dominion governments or to stand alone. The Maharaja of Kashmir had offered standstill agreement, which was accepted by the Pakistan. Wording of the offer of agreement is important, which states Jammu and Kashmir government would welcome standstill agreement with Pakistan on all matters on which these exist uh, at present moment with outgoing British India government. It is suggested that existing arrangements should continue pending settlement of details and formal execution of fresh arrangements, and Pakistan had accepted this. And this agreement was also implemented. The controversial instrument of accession between Maharaja Hari Singh and Government of India has been analyzed by different scholars, historians, and researchers. Some of them claim that instrument of accession is itself fraud. Second objection is the legal incapability of Maharaja, because at that time he was in agreement with Pakistan. The people of Jammu and Kashmir had liberated the major portion of the state, and on 26th October 1947, he was not de facto nor de jure ruler of the state. Even if we accept the legality of this instrument, it was conditional. Mountbatten, in his reply to the Maharaja's instrument of accession and accompanying letter, stated that as the accession of Kashmir had been a subject of dispute, the accession issue should be decided by a reference of the people as soon as law and order had been restored. Mountbatten's statement appeared to endorse the principle of right to self-determination for people of Kashmir, and they have established for posterity the proposition that the dispute should be settled by plebiscite. The complaint of India in United Nations against Pakistan was based on the instrument of accession, but United Nations did not accept Kashmir as a part of India. So this instrument had not any legal standing. Although all the United Nations resolutions are important, but the United Nations Commission for India and Pakistan's resolution of 13th August 1948 and 5th January 1949 are more than resolutions. The United Nations established a commission which obtained from India and Pakistan an agreement to a ceasefire, a withdrawal of troops, and a plebiscite under which the people of the disputed territories would decide their future. The ceasefire took place, but the demilitarization and had not taken effect, nor was the plebiscite held. Kashmir has remained a disputed territory divided by a ceasefire line ever since. These resolutions impose some legal obligations on both India and Pakistan. First, that acceptance could be said to have created a treaty between the two countries. A treaty is defined as an international agreement concluded between states in written form and governed by international law. Of course, an obligation may also be created simply by unilateral declaration of an intention to be bound. Both India and Pakistan asserted in the course of debate before the Security Council that an obligation to settle the Kashmir dispute could be based on the United Nations Commission for India and Pakistan resolutions that they had accepted. Therefore, India and Pakistan are legally bound to follow the terms of the settlement by the United Nations Commission for India and Pakistan resolutions, not because those resolutions themselves were binding, but rather because India and Pakistan had agreed to be bound by them. United Nations Security Council had appointed different personalities to mediate between India and Pakistan on the proposals of demilitarization and plebiscite. The reports submitted by these mediators are also important because these reports shows that all the efforts made under Chapter 6 of the United Nations Charter were unsuccessful, and now it is the responsibility of United Nations Security Council to invoke Chapter 7. On 5th August 2019, India unilaterally changed the status of occupied Jammu and Kashmir, which is clear violation of United Nations Security Council Resolution number 91 of 1951, 122 of 1957, and the bilateral agreements between India and Pakistan. So when we analyze these historical documents on Kashmir, these all documents shows that the people of Jammu and Kashmir have a right to self-determination, and Kashmir historically or legally Kashmir was or is not part of any country, India or Pakistan. I shall conclude my discussion with some suggestions. First, the Kashmir conflict is not a bilateral issue, as Dr. Nazir has already said, nor it is a religious issue. It is the case of right to self-determination of the people of erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir and should be presented in this context. Second, the people of Jammu and Kashmir are basic and necessary party of the case. The representation of Kashmiris in international legal and political forums should be worked out. Third, the immediate threat for the people of Jammu Kashmir is the systematic attempts of India to change the demography of Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir. A well-planned strategy and offensive move is required to stop India from this demographic engineering. Thanks so much.
Dr. Ahad, you need to unmute your mic, please. First, you unmute your mic, please.
Oh, okay, thanks. Thank you so much, Rajesh Saab, for having such an informative discussion with reference to documents about Kashmir. Our next speaker for today is Miss Victoria Schofield. She is educated at Lady Margaret Hall of Oxford University, from which she holds a degree in modern history. She was the visiting member of Alistair Home Fellow at St. Anthony's College, University of Oxford as well. She has authored many books like We Will Soldier and Statesman, Afghan Frontier, The Crossroads of the Conflict, and many others. For the book for which we specially requested her to join us is Kashmirian Conflict, India, Pakistan, and the Unending War. So I request Ms. Schofield to start our discussion. Before that, I want to inform the audience that after her discussion, we are going to have a comprehensive question answer session. So please, you can write your questions in comment box in YouTube and Facebook as well. So Ms. Schofield and Rajesh Ajad will be answering your questions after Ms. Schofield's discussion. Over to you, Ms. Schofield. Your mic is off, Ms. Victoria.
Victoria, you need to unmute. Yes, please.
Right. Thank
All
you
right.
so much, Dr. Ahad, and salam alaikum to all listeners. One of the advantages of these Zoom conversations, these Zoom webinars that we're having in this extraordinary period we're all living through, is that we can reach so many people, but we don't actually know quite who our audience is. And so from that point of view, it can be slightly unnerving. But thank you very much for inviting me to address this seminar and for accommodating my time preference. I do realize that many of you may have been expecting the seminar to take place slightly earlier in the day, but I just came in from Karachi last night, as some of you know. And so I'm now in the United Kingdom. I'm in London, and it's morning time in London. So thank you very much. I do appreciate that. I'm also honored that some of you have studied my work and will know that I have been writing on Kashmir now for over 25 years. My first book, which was Kashmir in the Crossfire, was published in 1996. And this month, as Dr. Nazir has mentioned, I'm publishing the updated edition, the 5th updated edition of this book. And I have it here. I just received a copy last night when I came in. And it does deal with the subsequent events post 5th of August 2019. So I have myself grown old with the Kashmir issue. I first visited the Valley of Kashmir in 1981, and I think it's because of my interest in relations between India and Pakistan and the people that I've encountered in Jammu and Kashmir that I've been so dedicated to trying to see this issue resolved. Sadly, what this does tell you is that throughout this period of time, we call it the Jammu Kashmir issue, as it's more correctly called, hasn't been resolved. Like other tribal spots in the world, we can think of Palestine, Cyprus, North and South Korea. It has continued, which means that generation after generation of people continue to suffer. Since I began work on Kashmir, a whole new generation has grown up. You, I'm sure, are probably among that generation of listeners. And the reason we're celebrating Kashmir Solidarity Day on 5th of February is in solidarity with all those Kashmiris who have died since the insurgency began. Statistics are hard to come by, but I think even conventional statistics give this number as over 70,000, quite possibly over 100,000. During the Vietnam War, the Americans lost 55,000 men, and this is well over that. And I think each life has to be considered. Each life lost unnecessarily has to be mourned. And we also remember, of course, Maqbul Butt, one of the main protagonists in the early days of fighting against the Indian Union. On 11th of February, he was hanged in Tihar jail. That was in 1984, 37 years ago. I state this because it makes us realize how long this has been going on. In the time I have today, I want to focus a little bit on the past history, and I want then to outline why, in my opinion, it's so important to resolve. Before we talk about resolution, what we really need to understand is what the issue involves. And I'm sure many of you think that you know what the issue is about, and we do know what the issue is about. It's about the rights of human people, of humans, individuals. But as time passes, we also get distanced from the reality and the sequence of events. And so my plea to all of you as students is to read that history, as we've just heard, to understand those documents, to understand the twists and turns, and not to take at face value sound bites and rhetoric. If you do so, you'll understand that it's far more complicated than it first appears. It is about territory and land, but it's also about the rights of people of different ethnic and religious affiliation with differing aspirations, and that mustn't be forgotten. We talk freely about the Kashmir issue, Kashmir under siege, human rights abuses, Kashmir under lockdown, but until we focus on what the issue is really about and take steps to resolve it, Kashmir will remain under siege. It will remain under lockdown. Human rights will continue to be abused. I can't emphasize that point strongly enough. We can spend 2 hours condemning human rights abuses. We can spend 2 days, but until we focus on resolving the issue, militarization will remain, and so will human rights abuses. So firstly, what is the issue? As I've said, it's more correctly the Jammu Kashmir issue because it involves the whole of the former princely state of Jammu and Kashmir, established in 1846 by the British in the aftermath of the First Sikh War, as we know, by the Treaty of Amritsar. So much of our attention is rightly on the Valley of Kashmir, the narrow strip of land 80 to 90 miles long, 20 to 25 miles wide, which lies in the heart of the state and at the heart of the issue. This is understandable because this is where the main human rights abuses have occurred. It's the area which is highly militarized, which has had to endure crackdowns and curfews. But if we're going to achieve resolution, we have to look at the whole state, of which the Kashmir Valley is only a fraction. As you know, currently the state is de facto divided between India and Pakistan along the line of control, the ceasefire line where the two sides stopped fighting in 1949. 2/3 of the former princely state lie with India, the valley, Jammu, and the sparsely inhabited region of Ladakh. 1/3 with Pakistan, Gilgit-Baltistan, and the narrow strip of land known as Azad, Free, Jammu and Kashmir, with its capital in Muzaffarabad. In addition, and we mustn't forget this now because it's come very much at the headline news in the past year, China occupies 2 uninhabited areas of the state, the Shaksgam Valley and the Aksai Chin in northeastern Ladakh. It's also, as you know, a majority Muslim state, but traditionally it was also the home of the Hindu Pandits, of Sikhs, Buddhists in Ladakh, Shia Muslims in the Kargil area. So for there to be resolution of the issue, the future of all these regions and the inhabitants has to be agreed, their aspirations acknowledged. Unless and until this happens, there will continue to be conflict. As you know, India and Pakistan have already fought 4 wars, 1947-49 in the aftermath of partition, 1965, 1971 over the secession of East Pakistan, and in 1999 in the Kargil Heights, which, like the 1965 war, was a crossing of the line of control in order to achieve militarily what dialogue had failed to do. There has been cross-border shelling, skirmishes, and most recently, in February 2019, the fear of another full-scale war, luckily averted on this occasion, but who knows what might happen next time. I mean, this I'm obviously referring to the attack in Pulwama, which led to the Indian air attack in Balakot. There have also been talks, numerous rounds of talks and more talks. But again, in my opinion, these have never come to fruition because no leader has had sufficient support to have been able to take a leap of faith to go the extra mile to resolve the dispute once and for all, even if what they may have to agree has an element of compromise. This, of course, begs the question why. Why has no leader determinedly sat down to resolve the dispute? Do they not want peace for the region, for their own people? Do they not want a friendly neighbor rather than a hostile one? Do they not want to spend the vast amounts of money that's spent on defense to benefit their people? Sadly, the answer mirrors the complexity of the issue. It relates mainly to vested interest, and despite appearances, a fear of an alteration to the status quo, regardless of how much the inhabitants of the region desperately want closure. Admittedly, there have been times when India and Pakistan appeared close. And I want now to talk a little bit about Shimla, as we call it, in 1972, the agreement between the governments of India and Pakistan. Admittedly, it was rejected by the Kashmiris themselves because it said it didn't include the opinions of the sons of the soil. But if you look at it, in reality, it really wasn't about Jammu and Kashmir. It was about resolving the relationship, putting the relationship of India and Pakistan back again on an even footing. And unfortunately, the narrative that is being captured, particularly by the government of India, is that through Simla, the two governments agreed that they would resolve their issues bilaterally. In other words, the international community had no place in any discussions. And this is very much the narrative. Whenever the issue is brought up, it's a bilateral issue between India and Pakistan. But I'm actually going to read, because very few people go back to the original document. And we just had an interesting presentation on documents and how important it is to look at the documents. It starts off with the government of India and the government of Pakistan are resolved that the two countries put an end to the conflict and confrontation that have hitherto marred their relations and work for the promotion of a friendly and harmonious relationship and the establishment of durable peace in the subcontinent, so that both countries may henceforth devote their resources and energies to the pressing task of advancing the welfare of their people. This is a very important clause, and it's lost in the rhetoric. It goes on that the principles and purposes of the Charter of the United Nations shall govern the relations between the two countries. What more lofty ideal could you have than that? That the two countries are resolved, now this is the important clause, to settle their differences by peaceful means through bilateral negotiations or by any other peaceful means mutually agreed upon between them. This doesn't mean that international mediation, facilitation, or discussion was done away with. It very much leaves it as a potential for resolving their differences. And I think this is where it's so important how, in the modern media, we capture a soundbite and we kind of run with it. But merely because this clause says that they will resolve to settle their differences by peaceful means through bilateral negotiations doesn't mean that if it were to help, a third-party mediator might not be included, nor does it do away with any of the United Nations resolutions on the India, what used to be called the India-Pakistan question in relation to Jammu and Kashmir. It goes on to say, pending the final settlement of any of the problems, and this was not Jammu Kashmir specific, it was just any problems between the two countries, neither side shall unilaterally alter the situation, and both shall prevent the organization, assistance, or encouragement of any acts detrimental to the maintenance of peace and harmonious relations. I think actually as a historian, when you're studying this, what happened in August 2019 is absolutely contrary to the terms of this similar agreement agreed by Zulfikar Ali Bhutto and Indira Gandhi. The only clause that relates to Jammu and Kashmir, which comes further down in the agreement, in Jammu and Kashmir, the line of control resulting from the ceasefire line of 17th of December 1971 should be respected by both sides without prejudice to the recognized position of either side. Neither side, again, this is important, shall seek to alter it unilaterally, irrespective of mutual differences and legal interpretations. Both sides further undertake to refrain from the threat or the use of force in violation of this line. I think it's tragic that we are so far away from the terms of this similar agreement. Of course, there were more talks and we had more hopes in 1989 and 1990 when Prime Ministers Benazir Bhutto and Rajiv Gandhi held talks. In 1998 with the bus diplomacy, when at the invitation of Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif, Indian Prime Minister Vajpayee traveled to Pakistan. He spoke at the Lahore Minar. But then, of course, we know came Kargil. And then we had in 2005-06 when the line of control was open to limited traffic. But then, of course, came the terrorist attacks in Mumbai. And so all these attempts have failed. But this guiding principle that the two countries want to live together in peace and for the benefit of all their inhabitants is there, and it can be revived. Tragically, and I will say this because I was in the Valley of Kashmir and there was a feeling that this was going to happen when I was there. The Kashmiris were very nervous about what was going on. You had 5th of August 2019 when the Indian government gave up on dialogue. This was a game changer, and we are in this game-changing phase at the moment. Previously, as one Kashmiri friend said to me, they'd always thought that if only the governments of India and Pakistan could hold successful talks in consultation with the inhabitants of the state, then there might be a hope of resolution. But 5th of August 2019, the revocation of Article 370 changed all that. And this tragically is a situation we're in today. By undertaking that unilateral action of in those regions, as I've emphasized, Indian government virtually threw out of the window the similar agreement. And even more firmly, they took, as we know, disbanded the state, turned it into a union territory with far more control from the Delhi government. By demoting that state to the Union Territory and, most significantly, including those areas under Pakistan's administration in its new official map. I think one must pay attention to this. It showed that the sort of solution Pakistan might have envisaged was no longer on the table. Effectively, that it no longer considered Pakistan as a negotiating partner. It was light years away from what had been agreed at Simla in 1972. In 1947, the previous Indian government had given Pakistan a status by agreeing, as we've just heard, that a plebiscite should be held, that terms were for demilitarization, then for a plebiscite to be held, that the people should be consulted. In 2019, it took away that status. And so I would say this was a huge setback for all those who want resolution, because this is not resolution. This is merely putting the lid on unaddressed aspirations and hoping they'll go away, that they will think people are so exhausted that they'll give up the struggle. So bringing the past up to date with the present, I'm afraid I'm not very optimistic about resolution in the present day. And while there's no resolution, the uncertainty remains. The next generation are caught up in the cycle of violence and repression. And I'm afraid, having been on numerous visits to the Valley of Kashmir, I've seen this. I've talked to the elders, and they've said if this is not resolved, in another generation will come up, the cycle of violence will begin again. And this is no way to lead a life. This brings me to the second point that I want to make, the second theme really, why it is so important, even notwithstanding everything I've said, that India and Pakistan resolve their differences over Jammu and Kashmir. And again, I'm talking about the entire state, not just the Valley of Kashmir, but also Gilgit-Baltistan, Azad Jammu and Kashmir, Jammu and Ladakh, for the sake of all these inhabitants and for the sake of the 200 million living in Pakistan, the over 1 billion living in India. Both countries are sitting on a demographic time bomb. Both countries are running out of water. In 1951, Pakistan's census population was 35 million. Now it's 200 million. But more or less, there's the same amount of water flowing from the mountains and falling from the skies. This is really a serious issue, and it's as serious also for India. Millions of dollars are collectively spent on weapons, including nuclear warheads, which could be spent on poverty eradication, development improvement in health, education. Neither population can claim full adult literacy. Too much money spent on the military, not enough on the people. And again, having visited both India and Pakistan, you cannot choose your neighbors. Pakistan and India will always be neighbors. And I think this is very, very important to realize. And then comes the issue of human rights. As I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, while the issue remains unresolved, militarization will remain. And with a large military presence, inevitably comes arbitrary behavior and human rights abuses. I won't go into all the statistics, they're too depressing, but we know that, as I say, even for one young man picked up, but there are thousands of young men picked up, tortured, disappeared, half widows who cannot remarry because they don't know what's happened to their husbands, thousands of orphans. The stories are endless. When I was in the Valley in 2019, I was interviewing a young student, and he said, would you mind if I came on my motorcycle with another person? I said, no, of course not. And the reason he wanted to come on his motorcycle with someone else is because he felt that if he went out on his own, he didn't know if he would come back, and he could be picked up, and then his parents would never know what happened to him. But he felt if there were two of them, there was a greater chance of returning home. I mean, this sort of life is not a life to be led. But unless there is resolution, this state of affairs will continue. These are people just like us who want to lead ordinary lives, have ordinary weddings, have grandchildren, and enjoy the beauty of their lives and their land. Finally, I would say resolution is essential because in the present day, before the Indian government attempts to put its money where its mouth is and undertake an adventurous action to take back Azad Jammu and Kashmir and Gilgit-Baltistan. I've mentioned the map. The Indian map includes, as part of the Union territory of Ladakh, Gilgit-Baltistan, and it includes, as part of the Union territory of Jammu and Kashmir, the region of Azad Jammu and Kashmir. If it were to do so, this would undoubtedly result in another war between India and Pakistan, with more loss of life, more martyrs to the cause of Jammu and Kashmir. And so I've spoken for less than my allotted 40 minutes because I feel there will be a lot of questions and there's a lot of aspects I haven't covered. But I think it's more important to allow time for questions, and I'm very happy to answer them. And I would urge you also to read, as I've said, the history, because it's very easy to get drawn into a bit of rhetoric, which doesn't really make sense when you put it in the larger complexity of the issue. The history is tortuous because there are so many failed opportunities. There are so many what ifs, so many if onlys. In 1962-63, India and Pakistan held talks. They were within a whisker of agreeing a resolution of the issue, and people could have led their lives peacefully, but the talks broke down. And what we have to look for now is that window of opportunity when something happens in the dynamic of either one or other country that brings these two countries to the negotiating table. I absolutely agree. It is entirely for the inhabitants of the state to decide their future, but with two powerful neighbors, next door, they have to have the agreement of those two neighbors. Otherwise, they won't survive. And I think everybody recognizes this. It has to be effectively a tripartite agreement with a representative voice coming from the state of Jammu and Kashmir. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Gloria. And now we have questions. First question I have is, someone is asking, what if one of the states is not ready to make peace? Would the world keep silence over that?
Shall I answer that now? Yes.
Yes.
I think that there is a tendency to feel that the international community, and I do take the point that it is in a way the third player, but unfortunately the situation is that no country will tolerate interference unless it's invited in. And this is the problem that's been facing. And I wouldn't say the international community has been totally silent. I'm a member of the international community, and I, for one, have been speaking out a lot. I addressed so many seminars, so many webinars about the Kashmir issue. There is a large body of people who are very much aware, but it's very difficult to force yourself either into Pakistan. Pakistan would equally resent any interference unless it's invited in. And I think, again, somehow it's an element of frustration that people have, that they feel, why is the international community not done enough? The body of legislation is lying with the United Nations. The United Nations has given the endorsement that these two countries must do what they've agreed to do. But there was no, unfortunately, mandatory force within that agreement. It was an agreement that was agreed. Both leaders of India and Pakistan agreed on a way forward, but then one chose not to follow that way forward. And as I say, it's very little that one can do. But I do feel that the voice, the pen, is in that respect mightier than the sword. And there have been an enormous number of international initiatives, both at the European Union and again at the United Nations, speaking out. But ultimately, it is for the countries to resolve. But that's why I spent a lot of time talking about Simla, because I think this is something that has to be eradicated from the narrative that at Simla, the two countries agreed to resolve their issues bilaterally. I've read it out very clearly. They didn't. They said they would like to, or by any other method that was agreed between the two of them. And there's no shame in having an international mediator. It's like saying we want to divorce, but we're not going to use a lawyer. When the United Kingdom had great difficulties with Northern Ireland, they had no shame in bringing in the United States to sort of break the logjam. That's the objective. And that's what needs to happen, I think, with the India-Pakistan situation, because otherwise it would have been resolved. But you can see they come to the negotiating table, they talk. I mean, there was an optimism in 2005, 6, 7 that there was going to be some sort of resolution, but it's failed. And as I say, if you agree to separate from your partner in a way, but you won't use a lawyer, it's pointless. And people suffer. This is the thing. I think it's very easy to talk about the issue from Islamabad and from Delhi or from Muzaffarabad even. But, when you go to the region and you see barbed wire and you talk to young students, as I did in that summer of 2019, who want a life like us, like our children. They don't want to spend their life in crossfire and crackdown and curfew. They want to feel that these young can have aspirations. And we know what it's like to be a teenager. You want to feel that your life is worth something, that you've got something to aspire to. The depression that is there. Again, these statistics aren't well documented. The nervous breakdowns that take place because of living in this tension, this tense atmosphere. Look at us living in the COVID period of lockdown. We have our statistics of domestic abuse going up, our statistics of suicide, of mental health issues. That is just one aspect that we've had in the very comfortable lives otherwise we've had to endure. That is double lockdown there, because you've got the concern now about the pandemic, and then you've got the restrictions. that are taking place. And as citizens of the world, it's not good enough.
Thanks. We have another question. Gilgit-Baltistan was the annexed state with Kashmir, which has now become a part of Pakistan, separate from Azad Kashmir. In your opinion, what should be the possible procedure to decide Kashmiris will when there are three groups supporting Pakistan, supporting India, and third group wants a separate independent Kashmir? Do you think, what are your comments? And even Raji Saab, if you want to comment on the questions, you are also welcome. Dr. Nazir Saab, if you want to comment, so please do comment.
Let Victoria answer the questions because she has very eloquently thrown light on the Kashmir issue. So let Victoria to deal with the major questions, and if there is Raja Saab can deal with it.
Okay. Well, I'll just, I think one of the issues, and again, it's very difficult to say, which is why the history is so important, is that the state was artificially, if you like, put together in 1846 by the British. We're talking about an era of imperialism. We're talking about an era which fortunately is gone now. And it was created really as a buffer against the rising of the Sikhs, but it had no natural unity.
तो देखिए वो ना मुझे स्क्रीनशॉट लेके भेज दो और पिक्चर बना के, क्योंकि वो लैपटॉप पे नजर आ रहा है, मोबाइल पे नहीं खुल रहा है.
I'm hearing Rahad.
Yeah. Rahad, please mute your mic, please.
No, Victoria, you can start.
Sorry, it was a bit confusing.
Sorry.
And therefore, what we're seeing with this is that this state, we have an affection and we have a natural inclination not to break up a state. And I remember when I was talking with Amanullah Khan when he was still alive, the JKLF leader, and he said, well, if you break up Kashmir, you might as well break up Pakistan, because Pakistan also has its different cultural units, and its different provinces. But it's very clear, I think, that, if we just look at Gilgit-Baltistan in particular, that these people, they are politically part of the state of Jammu and Kashmir, but they're not actually ethnically Kashmiris. There's absolutely no Kashmiri spoken in Gilgit-Baltistan. And so one would say that by right, they should have the opportunity to choose their future and their future allegiance without being tied, so to speak, to the majority voice, which by definition happens to be in the Valley of Kashmir because it's more densely populated. And this is where democracy has difficulties in being put into effect, because you cannot also have the tyranny of the majority over the minority. And what one would have liked to see, quite possibly before, as I say, the game changed with August 5th, 2019, was an agreement between India and Pakistan that Gilgit-Baltistan was, the fifth province of Pakistan, whatever you like to call it, and really to take it away from being part of the state of Jammu and Kashmir. But to do that, you change the dialogue, and therefore that leaves the license for India to say, well, okay, we're going to now take away Ladakh, and you reduce down the state. But this is what we're really facing. And ironically, it's nothing new. In 1950s, Owen Dixon saw this issue. He saw this problem. And again, his report is readily available online. I urge all students of Jammu and Kashmir to read it, because he identified these problems way back in 1950, that what you're trying to do is resolve the future of an area whose inhabitants have different aspirations, whether it's because of religion or culture. And I think very clearly by the rebellion, we know that the rulers of Gilgit and Baltistan, the accession that they made to Pakistan. But of course, Pakistan was trying to play by the rules of the book and didn't want to accept Gilgit-Baltistan as part of Pakistan, because it felt that it would therefore pave the way for India to say, okay, well, we're going to take that bit. And it wanted the whole issue to be resolved through, according to what the United Nations had prescribed by a plebiscite. But it's, in the present day, and that's why, I put this suggestion that the Indian government might launch some adventurous attack into Gilgit-Baltistan, it would be severely repelled and it would lead to war. But you read the rhetoric, they are talking about taking back, our next objective is to take back GP. And this is very alarming in the 21st century, especially when you've got people who have no desire to be taken back by the government of India and, you know, are perfectly happy. I mean, I've traveled through Gilgit-Baltistan. I've interviewed those people living there. And, you know, they may complain about certain factors, you know, domestic issues, but by and large, that area is very much part of Pakistan. And, you know, from Pakistan's point of view, it's the route of the Karakoram Highway, you know, up to the Punjab. There's no question of that area, you know, of Pakistan thinking that area would go, which is where it becomes very difficult when you're talking about the independence of the whole state of Jammu and Kashmir, because India won't let go its bit. Would Pakistan let go Gilgit-Baltistan? I very much doubt it. So one has to look at the whole issue. That's why, as I say, when one's talking about resolution, it's so important and it's so difficult because you've got these different areas. But resolution is of the whole state. It's not just of the Valley of Kashmir. And the Valley of Kashmir, important as it is, populated as it is, as I've mentioned, if you traverse it, it's 80 to 90 miles long. It's sort of, I think, London to York, if you think about the UK. I can't quite think of something equivalent in Pakistan, 20 to 25 miles wide. It's a fraction of the whole state geographically. I hope that's answered the question. Perhaps Raja Saab wants to add anything.
Thanks. Right, sir, you want to comment something? Raja Saab, do you want to comment? Okay, I'll move on to the next question. The next question is, one of our students asked, as Ms. Victoria mentioned, that there is a pessimism regarding Kashmir conflict. What should be the role of international community to resolve this issue?
Well, as I've said before, I think the international community has a voice. It has displayed its voice, whether it's in the European Union. I mean, sadly, the UK is no longer part of the European Union, but nonetheless, we have the British Parliament. Quite recently, we had a debate on Jammu and Kashmir in a committee room in the House of Commons. And I think it's up to the international community to be observant of what's going on, because when this window opens again, if it's appropriate, the international community can move in as a mediator or as a facilitator. As I've suggested, no country can suddenly walk into another country and tell them what to do. No country would tolerate that. I do think the international community must be observant. And I think international commentators like myself, like others, there are other very good writers, need to continue to talk. And civil society needs to be alert. You know, you can't go to sleep on an issue and then suddenly wake up and say you want to be a part of it. So I think it's our responsibility to keep aware of what's going on and see what we can do when there is an opportunity to help. But I think the illusion that the international, as I say, even talking about the international community as though it's one body is erroneous and gives a misconception about what the international community can do. But whether you use the United Nations or a body of countries, you know, a grouping from the United Nations or a group from the European Union, it's very important to keep them informed and to keep informed, to put pressure, because India is a big country. It's a growing country. It wants to become an economic tiger. And I think it very much like China with the Uyghurs, it should be shamed into having a situation where human rights are abused. And I think this should be made public. And I think that's a very important role that the international community can do.
Thanks. Next question is with reference to your discussion as well. As you mentioned that India and Pakistan should resolve their differences, and you have emphasized bringing Gilgit-Baltistan into the equation. One of our students or audience said that, as Alistair Lamb has clearly said and mentioned, that Gilgit-Baltistan threw away all vestige of Dogra rule and declared for Pakistan, then what's the legal standing of fitting in Gilgit-Baltistan in this equation? Thanks.
Well, it's true. I mean, as I mentioned, they did declare there was a rebellion in Gilgit-Baltistan led by an English officer, Major William Brown. His widow is still alive, and I've met her on numerous occasions. The problem was, as I've also mentioned, that the Pakistan government didn't want to accept the accession because it didn't want to alter the framework at all, pending resolution of the whole issue. And this is what's been so problematical. However, it's true that in 2009, the decision was taken to up the status of Gilgit-Baltistan. It hasn't been fully incorporated into Pakistan, but because the people of Gilgit-Baltistan were unhappy with their representation, that decision was taken. But for it to, as I say, it's how much, a country unilaterally, Pakistan doesn't want to be accused of unilaterally doing something, which it's accused India of doing, which is taking the area that it controls as part of India. So it's held back from incorporating Gilgit-Baltistan fully as part of Pakistan. I mean, again, if you look at Pakistan's new map, it looks more part of Pakistan than it used to. But this is where maps are so very important, because maps represent the expectations of what countries think is the area that they control. And as I say, you look at the new map of India, even previously you looked at the map of India, it always included Gilgit-Baltistan as part of India, because the Indian government's narrative is that the Maharaja exceeded and brought the whole state into India. But that's why a sensible discussion is imperative, because you can carry on with your rhetoric back and forward from Islamabad to Delhi, but to look at the ground realities and accept what the ground realities are and the aspirations of the people are is absolutely essential. And, it's a luxury, actually, that these two countries can't afford for reasons I've explained, because they spend a lot of money on armaments. But you travel into the interior of either country and you see poverty, which should not exist in a country which possesses nuclear weapons.
Thanks. And other question about this is with reference to...
Dr. Raj, I want to add.
Ji, please, sure.
I want to add one thing. As one question was about the GB and that it has annexed with Pakistan. GB was part of state of Jammu and Kashmir on 14th August 1947, the former state of Jammu and Kashmir. When we discuss the United Nations resolutions, it was disputed territory and the part of the Kashmir conflict. Although some constitutional amendments were made by government of Pakistan in 2009, they are trying to introduce new legal framework or constitution for GB. But if you say you read the letters between government of Pakistan and different mediators appointed by United Nations, in those letters it was clearly agreed and mentioned by government of Pakistan as well that Gilgit-Baltistan is the part of state of Jammu and Kashmir. So to date, Pakistan had not included Gilgit-Baltistan as its territories in the Constitution of Islamic Republic of Pakistan. When you read Article 1 of the Constitution of Pakistan, the areas, Gilgit-Baltistan is not in the areas of Pakistan. So it is a disputed territory. And second, the discussions between, if you see the proposals of Musharraf about the regional plebiscite. In that regional plebiscite, Musharraf also included Gilgit-Baltistan as a region and also discussed that area for regional plebiscite. One other important document is a Karachi Agreement, which was signed between government of Pakistan and the government of Azad Jammu and Kashmir. If the Gilgit-Baltistan was the part of Pakistan, why the government of Pakistan has signed an agreement with government of Azad Jammu and Kashmir about the administration of Gilgit-Baltistan? So, legally, the Gilgit-Baltistan is and was the part of former state of Jammu and Kashmir is the part of Kashmir conflict. Thank you.
Well, I think I'm agreeing with Raja Sab, because that's the point. That's why it's not been officially incorporated, because the Pakistan government recognizes that it is part of the state of Jammu and Kashmir, and it has remained so, and it has not wanted to incorporate it fully, as I said, because it's been waiting for the resolution of the whole dispute. But it is a fact that there are people in Gilgit-Baltistan who dislike the fact that they were not having full representation as being part of Pakistan. And it's also a fact that the Karakoram Highway goes through Gilgit-Baltistan and is essential for Pakistan's operations with China, with CPEC.
Thanks a lot. Next question, and that is with reference to siege of Kashmir by the occupational forces. It said that justice delayed is justice denied on the humanitarian grounds, and obviously as an international issue, what a role UN can play, and how UN can be effective in resolving this issue.
Well, I mean, I think what's encouraging for this questioner is that for the first time in 28, I'm just going to get my revised book, because I've put this in the book, is that the UN has issued 2 very significant reports on the situation in Jammu and Kashmir in 2018 and 2019. The Office of the United Nations Commissioner for Human Rights issued a report, Human Rights in Kashmir, which examined developments in both Indian and Pakistani-administered Kashmir. Again, these are available online. You can read these reports, and this is something useful that the UN has done, because the UN does have stature and it does have clout. One might wonder why it took it quite so long to make these reports, but these reports, 2018 and 2019, are readily available. And I think, you know, if you look at the human rights abuses, it talks about using Farooq Ahmad Dar as a human shield when he was strapped to the front of a moving Indian Army jeep. All this has been documented, and this is by the UN. So I think that is something it can do, and one would hope it would continue to do these reports. And the reason it made these reports was because of pressure from people that it should make these reports. So pressure on the UN is very important, that it should continue to observe what's going on in terms of human rights abuses, because, as I say, it's one aspect, and unfortunately, until there's resolution, you will continue to have these human rights abuses, because you will continue to have a large military presence, and inevitably, when you have a large military presence, you have human rights abuses. So I think that's one positive coming out of the UN, these 2 human rights reports. And I urge you students to go online. This is one of the benefits we all now have with the media, that you just put it in and you can read the full reports.
Thanks. Another question also relates indirectly to UN's role to solve the Kashmir issue, but particularly to resolve sufferings of Kashmiris. And it is asked that since government of India is making constitutional amendments, and in that amendments, even within India, the states and the farmers issue and so many issues. So all that India is doing with its own citizens and the Kashmiris, the question is that why UN is quiet, why UN is not taking some practical steps to resolve the issue.
Well, again,
the international community as well.
One's talking, and again, it's rather difficult when you just talk about a body as the UN. I mean, you've got to go to the relevant department of the UN. Again, the international community. I mean, the international community is 165 countries. I mean, you've got to focus on on who in particular. You can't just sort of expect the international community to suddenly stand up. You've got to actually address a country that would have an interest in this, or you've got to address the United Nations, the particular department. And that's why I mentioned the United Nations Office for Human Rights, because that's where you direct your attention. It's you know, as a historian and as a journalist, I would say one shouldn't just resort to blanket terms and say, as I say, blame the international community. Who in the international community would have the clout? You know, would it be the United Kingdom? Talk to members of the United Kingdom. Talk to members of the United States. I mean, you know, as you know, they've just had an election. They have a new president, so maybe the office of the new president one should talk to. But it's really not very effective just to talk about the international community or the United Nations. It's a huge body. You've got to focus on who in the United Nations you think could make a difference and which department you should go to. And in this issue, it really is the Department of Human Rights. And, you know, the observance of the International Declaration of Human Rights. That's what's important. And so I think, you know, as I said, one can't sit back and wait for the international community to act. One has to approach specific members of that international community to present them with facts and then, you know, move them to take action. And as I say, I think it's too easy just to say, well, the international community is silent. It isn't silent. Certain bodies are working, and certain bodies can be made to work when provided with information and when encouraged to do so. So I think it has to be broken down to the specific area that needs to be approached, so a specific department that needs to be approached. We lost Rahar. Oh, there she is.
Thank you so much, Victoria, for your comprehensive answers. And now I request Dr. Sajid Mahmood Awan, Director NHCR, for his vote of thanks and concluding remarks. Dr. Sajid Sahab, over to you.
Ji. Thank you, Dr. Ahad. Thank you very much. It will not be any conventional vote of thanks merely, because this is such a critical issue, very clear, very close to our hearts and our minds, that we are sensitized. And it is not only vote of thanks for all the speakers and the organizers, rather those who joined, those who asked questions, those who made arrangements for this management. They all actually need high appreciation and thanks for taking this opportunity. I would like to say that the way basically our university top leadership, Honorable Vice Chancellor and Honorable Dean Sir, the way they manage the things and they helped us to keep the things rolling even in this pandemic, very critical situation, it is really marvelous. I'm really highly obliged to them. And then the way, Dr. Rahat, you manage the things, particularly the way you caught Victoria when she was lost in this time schedule. And I was thinking that she got displaced. We actually ourselves were displaced when we were missing her. It is really great the way you managed her, and very special thanks to Victoria that she basically, after having such a long journey from Pakistan to UK, even then she managed to come and to join this seminar. And it is really marvelous. I know that you are very emotionally attached to Pakistan and to the people of Pakistan. Same as here. And similarly, people of Pakistan and students and academia and civil society and journalists, they all want to listen to you because you have been doing a lot on this particular issue. And then the way Raja Sajjad Sahab, he himself is running a show, running a forum, running seminars, conferences, and he is doing marvelous for this cause of Kashmir. And I know that his contribution is also marvelous. And I'm really thankful to you, Raisa, that you spared your time. And here, chair, Dr. Nazir himself is Kashmiri basically. On this particular day, sir, we all are feeling that we all are Kashmiris, and we are feeling like that. We are feeling that feeling of their enslavement and their besiegement and their misery and all the pains and agony which they are feeling. We are feeling from the core of our heart, and I'm really thankful to the speakers, the way they basically uh, discussed all the issues and many dimensions of the issues. They were of great value. The way Sajjad Sahab reviewed this historical review of the issue in light of the United Nations resolutions and and all the steps which UN and international community was taking, and the way India and Pakistan were responding to that, and of course the way then Victoria took up this issue uh, from all the dimensions, from Indian side, from Pakistani perspective, from Chinese perspective, from international dimension, and the way she highlighted all the
So eventually we lost Sajid Awan.
Yes.
He might have gone to Gilgit-Baltistan.
Well, while he's wait, could I just thank you all so much for listening and encourage everybody, as I say, to read and understand, because what I've found in my long years of research is that it's only with knowledge can you make a helpful contribution. Too little knowledge, you can't really say very much, you can't really do much. So I would encourage everybody out there listening. I mean, we can't see who you are, but to study and to understand and to learn, and you will understand the complexities of it. But also to keep an open mind, because somewhere at some point there will be an opportunity for resolution. And both India and Pakistan and the inhabitants of the state of Jammu and Kashmir, they deserve that. They're all wonderful people, and they deserve to be able to live lives of freedom, freedom of speech, freedom of movement, which we in the West enjoy. And I think this is absolutely essential for a world of the 21st century where we have so much technology. Look how we can talk to each other, but certain people cannot lead their lives freely, and I think that's the objective we need to fight for, with dignity, and that's what we need, because we are very privileged in the West, and it breaks your heart when you see people living without that dignity. So thank you so much for inviting me to participate, and keep research and keep the voice, because the voice is very important, and the pen.
Thank you, Victoria, and thank you, Rajasad, for your very patient discourse. Here is Sajjad again. Avanza, you wanted to say something?
There was basically there was a little disconnect. This disconnect is between India and Pakistan and the international community on this particular issue. That is why it is lingering on and on and on. So I was discussing that government of Pakistan, I think, is doing the same, investing on humans just to deal with this GB and AJK, uh, giving bringing them out of that special status and giving them these political and economic rights and these investments. Then very beautifully, Victoria mentioned that now this is not merely a bilateral issue. Now it will be dealt tripartitely, and maybe it requires quadripartite involvement, the China, India, Pakistan, and international community, including the native Kashmiris, when they all sit together, keeping in consideration aspirations of all the people, this issue can be resolved. And I'm really impressed with the way students posed questions. They were basically very, important. They were discussing all the different aspects, and particularly even they touched CPAC. And in this dimension, let's hope that with the involvement of China in this region, maybe there will be some other possibilities to resolve this issue. Then Sajjad Sahab also highlighted that this issue of plebiscite. Generally, people use three methods of taking public opinion. One is plebiscite, other one referendum, and third one election. Elections, Indians are they are organizing elections routinely, and even this time they are increasing seats of uh, Kashmir Assembly. But elections cannot be replacement of plebiscite. Plebiscite means giving them right of self-determination, whether with two choices or with third choice. One way or the other, all the humanity is looking towards this issue. And of course, it is that important issue that it can involve not only this region, rather it can involve the whole world. So, be it or not, this is one of the oldest issues to be resolved, which has caused not many sacrifices, ethnic cleansing, genocide, missing persons, widows, and all the things which our speakers have highlighted. This should be resolved one way or the other. And I think India should take lesson that this is not a time of imperialism. This is not a time of expansionism. We can have the example of USSR before us. We have the examples of UK. We have the examples of France. That all the colonies and imperial powers are shrinking, and Russia had to withdraw from all Central Asia and even from Afghanistan. One way or the other, this issue will have to be resolved. And particularly, I'll request my counterparts that in India, that as lot many movements are going on there, they should try to take them humanitarianly. And if they are not settling the issue of Kashmir, they will be provoking lot many other issues. Better settle it as early as possible, sooner the better. At the end, I again thank my Vice Chancellor, my Dean, honorable speakers, audience, all the participants, and the organizers. And particularly, I would like to mention one person. Is Ahmed, our friend, who is running basically this webinar. I'm really indebted to them all, and I hope that this little effort will add some value to the resolution of this issue. And this is our resolve, that we need this issue be resolved as early as possible. I thank you all, and I wish you all the best. Pakistan Zindabad and Kashmir Zindabad. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, over to you, Rahat.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sajid Awan. I'm grateful to all the participants, speakers, and Vice Chancellor Quaid-i-Azam University, and Dean Social Sciences Quaid-i-Azam University, Miss Victoria, Raja Sajjad Sahab, and Sajid Awan Sahab. With all of your support, it was possible to organize this webinar. With your support, it was possible to be together and to discuss this issue of international importance. I conclude this webinar for today with a prayer to get this issue be resolved at the earliest, so that the people of Kashmir may get their right to live. Thank you so much.